What happens when a country dares to strike in a place the enemy believes is untouchable? For years, Russia treated the Caspian Sea like its private backyard, a so-called safe zone, sealed off from Ukraine and the West. No one expected an attack there. No one thought it was even possible. But in the early hours of August 15th, that illusion went up in flames. Ukraine launched a strike so audacious, so deep inside Russian territory, that it shattered the idea of safe waters forever. This wasn't just about a single ship, it was about exposing a weakness Moscow never wanted the world to see. The vessel at the center of it all was the Port Olia 4, a Russian cargo ship easing away from its berth in Astrakhan, loaded with more than just routine supplies. Hidden in its hold were Iranian-made Shahed drone engines, ammunition, and spare parts, the very components fueling Russia's relentless airstrikes on Ukrainian cities. To Moscow, this voyage was untouchable. The Caspian Sea was supposed to be one of the safest waterways in the world, landlocked, surrounded only by allies or neutral states, far from the chaos of the front lines. From the Kremlin's perspective, a ship like Port Olia 4 could move freely, shielded by geography and by arrogance. But to Ukrainian intelligence, those wooden crates stacked floor to ceiling weren't just cargo. They were future attacks waiting to happen. Every drone engine on board represented another night of sirens in Kiev, another power station plunged into darkness. To let that ship sail unchallenged wasn't an option. And that's why, even as the crew believed they were embarking on a routine journey, Ukraine had already marked Port Olia 4 as a target that couldn't be allowed to reach its destination. They didn't rush in. They watched. Far from the roar of battle, Ukrainian operators tracked Port Olia 4 like astronomers following a rare comet, patient, precise, and utterly focused. Months of pattern analysis had shown when the ship would move, which channels it used, and how Russian patrols timed their sweeps. A plan formed not around brute force, but around stealth. A long-range strike drone tuned for silence, with engines and guidance set to slip beneath radar and blend with the night. The drone didn't fly in a straight line. It threaded corridors of low-altitude air, hugged terrain and sea surface to hide its signature, and crossed vast swaths of Russian-controlled space without tripping the alarms Moscow relied on. Operators monitored every heartbeat of the mission, nudging coordinates, conserving battery, and waiting for the moment when the ship's position, cover of darkness, and wind all lined up. This wasn't improvisation. It was careful engineering of surprise, a message built into a weapon. And when the operators finally saw their window open, they didn't hesitate. The approach was silent, surgical, and about to rewrite what Moscow thought was invulnerable. But the hit itself would do more than sink a ship. It would shatter an assumption. The drone closed like a secret. Low, slow, almost nothing on a radar screen. At 4:25 a.m., it found the Port Olia 4 and did what it was built to do. It hit the starboard side just ahead of the superstructure. The warhead punched into the cargo hold where wooden crates were stacked tight, engines, circuit boards, ammunition. The impact was sudden, brutal, and precisely aimed. Heat and metal met fuel and paper. The fire started inside the belly of the ship and spread faster than anyone expected. Explosions rolled through the hold, deck plates peeled back, sparks turned to orange tongues. Black smoke climbed into the dawn like a signal no one could ignore. Crew voices turned to shouts, alarms screamed, confusion reigned. Boats in the harbor pulled back. On the shore, binoculars found a new, terrifying shape on the horizon, a burning ship, listing, shedding debris into the water. By 4:35, the Port Olia 4 was ablaze from bow to stern. The strike had not been a flailing attempt or a lucky hit. It was surgical, a single-minded strike that hit exactly where it would hurt the most. That night, the Caspian stopped being a promise of safety. What came next wouldn't just be about firefighting or damage reports. It would force a larger reckoning, in Moscow, in Tehran, and across capitals watching to see how far this new reach could go. On a map, the Caspian looks like nothing more than a giant inland lake, sealed off, ringed by 5 countries: Russia, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Iran, and Azerbaijan. To Moscow, that geography was a fortress. No NATO ships, no Ukrainian shoreline, no easy entry point for enemies. For years, the Kremlin sold the idea that the Caspian was untouchable, a sanctuary where supply lines could run without escorts or heavy defenses. Ports like Astrakhan and Olia became vital lifelines, pushing Iranian-made drones and ammunition straight into Russia's war machine. Every crate that moved across its calm waters meant another strike on Ukrainian cities. Unlike the Black Sea, where Ukrainian drones and Western surveillance kept Russia on edge, the Caspian felt private, almost complacent. Convoys weren't needed. Escorts weren't assigned. Defenses were pointed outward, not inward. To Russian commanders, it was as close to guaranteed safety as a war could offer. That's exactly why the strike mattered so much. When Ukraine's drone found Port Olia 4, it didn't just tear into steel and cargo, it ripped apart the myth of geography itself. If a weapon could cross hundreds of kilometers, slip through inland defenses, and explode in the heart of Russia's so-called backyard, then nowhere was safe. And from that moment on, every ship, every port, and every stockpile along the Caspian stopped being untouchable. They became targets waiting in plain sight. The first official responses were slow and shaky. At dawn, Russian port officials fumbled through half explanations: a fire aboard a civilian vessel, an accident under investigation, while state outlets searched for versions that would stick. Denial bought time, but it didn't erase the facts. Within hours, independent satellite images and leaked overhead photos painted a clearer picture: a crippled ship at its berth, burn scars across the deck, and a dark sheen of fuel spreading on the water. Faced with visual proof, the carefully scripted denials unraveled. Social media filled with eyewitness accounts and grainy videos. Analysts in the West began sketching the technical profile of the strike. Kremlin-friendly channels floated alternative theories: a stray electrical spark, crew error, bad maintenance, anything to avoid admitting a penetrative, long-range drone attack inside Russian-controlled waters. Those narratives competed for attention, but the imagery kept winning. The incident also exposed fractures beyond Moscow's information bubble. Tehran, quietly implicated because the cargo traces back to Iranian supplies, started urging tougher defenses and faster explanations. Regional partners watched nervously, rerouting assumptions about what routes were safe and what escorts might be necessary. Meanwhile, military planners on both sides began recalculating. Satellites and open-source footage had converted a rumor into a public, undeniable reality. The fallout wasn't just political theater. It forced immediate operational changes. Patrol patterns were revised, harbor security tightened, and military assets were shuffled to cover previously neglected corridors. But the most damaging consequence for Moscow was reputational. The image of invulnerability had been pierced, and if the Caspian could be breached, commanders had to ask themselves a harder question: what else could suddenly be within reach? Next, the strategic consequences that turned a single strike into a wider problem for Russia's entire logistics network. The strike did more than scorch paint and metal. It rewired the calculus of war. Logistics, not frontline heroics, had just been attacked, and logistics are the quiet backbone of any military campaign. Ships carrying engines and munitions suddenly mattered as much as missiles. Every crate lost at sea became a canceled sortie, and a sleepless night for commanders counting supplies. That raised the cost of moving weapons. Convoys needed escorts, ports needed hardening, and what was once routine now demanded manpower and radar hours. Resources had to be pulled away from other priorities. Air defenses meant for borders and high-value targets were retasked to cover inland coasts. Patrols lengthened and fuel costs rose. What looked like a single tactical win morphed into a strategic drain that could slow operations across theaters. Iran's supply chain felt it immediately. If the Caspian route could be threatened, Tehran's quiet pipeline of parts into Russia lost reliability. Advisors pushed for hardened logistics and closer coordination, and Moscow had to listen because the alternative was leaving its supply arteries exposed. Allies and rivals watched too. Western capitals saw evidence that asymmetric tactics could erode raw advantage without a fleet of heavy missiles. For Kyiv, the strike was proof that clever engineering and patience could extend reach. For Moscow, it was proof that complacency could be lethal. The psychological hit deserves its own tally. Morale inside Russia's logistics circles slipped, while Ukraine's defenders and their backers gained confidence. The message was clear: geography no longer guaranteed safety, and perceptions of invulnerability could be weaponized. Finally, the strike set a precedent. Commanders now had to plan for attacks along previously secure lines, rethink insurance for shipments, and accept that every coastal mile might need defense. That kind of shift doesn't reverse overnight. It forces budgets, doctrines, and politics to change. But the operational and political ripples were only part of the story. What came next would test whether this was a one-off demonstration or the start of a new, far-reaching campaign. Wars aren't just fought with weapons, they're fought with perceptions, and the strike on Port Olia 4 hit Russia where its defenses couldn't reach: pride. For Moscow, the Caspian had been more than a waterway. It was a symbol of depth, of distance, of safety carved into geography itself. To see flames rise from a ship in those waters was to admit that no corner of the map was beyond danger. That realization rippled through military ranks and civilian circles alike, planting doubt in places that once felt untouchable. Inside Russia, the silence of the Ministry of Defense spoke volumes. The less they admitted, the more speculation grew. Was this a fluke? Was every vessel at risk? If a drone could cross that far undetected, what else could it reach? Questions multiplied faster than officials could suppress them. Meanwhile, in Kyiv, the mood shifted. The message was plain: distance does not equal safety. That single sentence carried power, a morale boost for soldiers holding the line, a rallying cry for civilians enduring blackouts and air raids. Every successful strike reinforced the idea that Russia's overwhelming advantage wasn't absolute, and that ingenuity could punch holes in even the strongest walls. Western allies noticed too. For months, debates had circled about whether aid was truly making an impact. But now there was proof. A drone built in workshops, guided by clever operators, had turned a safe zone into a headline. For lawmakers and publics abroad, it was evidence that support wasn't just symbolic, it was reshaping the battlefield in real time. And then there was Iran. Its strategy of quietly funneling drones into Russia depended on that lifeline across the Caspian. Watching a supply ship burn in Russian waters didn't just raise alarms, it shook confidence. Advisors pressed for tighter defenses, fearing the next strike might cut off shipments before they even touched Russian soil. In one strike, Ukraine managed to bend politics, morale, and perception. Moscow was forced onto the defensive, allies were encouraged, and rivals began second-guessing their plans. That's the power of psychological warfare. No crater on a map, but a lasting scar in the mind. The flames on the Port Olia 4 did more than sink a ship. They redrew the boundaries of the battlefield. For decades, Russia relied on geography as its silent ally. Distance, depth, and layers of defenses created the illusion that some places were beyond reach. The Caspian was the ultimate example. A closed sea, a safe rear area, a private lake Moscow believed would never see enemy fire. But Ukraine shattered that map. In one strike, it proved that distance is not protection, and that even inland waters can be penetrated. Suddenly, no refinery, no port, and no supply hub could be assumed safe. Every line on the logistics map had to be rethought. Commanders who once slept soundly, knowing certain regions were secure, now had to factor in the possibility of silent drones flying hundreds of kilometers, hugging the ground, and detonating right where it hurts most. For Ukraine, the message was empowering: we can reach you anywhere. For its allies, it was a demonstration of resilience and ingenuity, proof that asymmetric tactics could counterbalance overwhelming force. And for Russia, it was a nightmare that stretched far beyond one burning vessel. This was the bigger picture, a shift from localized battles to psychological dominance. Geography had always been Russia's shield. Now that shield was cracked, and once a crack appears, it's only a matter of time before the whole structure gives way. The strike on the Port Olia 4 wasn't just a headline, it was a warning, a reminder that in modern war, sanctuaries don't exist. The burning wreck of the Port Olia 4 wasn't just another casualty of war, it was a symbol, proof that even the most carefully guarded myths can collapse overnight. Russia believed the Caspian Sea was a sanctuary, a place beyond the reach of enemy hands. Ukraine showed the world that no such place exists. From this point forward, every Russian port, every supply line, every so-called safe zone carries a question mark. Distance no longer equals safety, geography no longer guarantees protection, and that single shift in perception may prove more powerful than any missile. So here's the real question. If Ukraine can strike deep into the Caspian, where might they go next? Could it be another port, a refinery, or something Moscow hasn't even thought to defend yet? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading them. And if this story opened your eyes to just how fragile safe zones can be, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more frontline stories. Share this video with anyone who still believes geography protects Russia. And remember, the next time someone tells you that the Caspian is off limits, ask them one thing: safe for who?